the Adoptive Mom Podcast. Adoption may look different for each family, but we need solidarity from other crazy people who took this leap. And that is what we do here. We encourage, we build up, we share the wins and losses. We lean on each other, and we get through this together. Thanks for joining us. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. My name is Alex Fitton, and I am so excited for you to join me today. This is the first episode on a 3-part series on trauma. So as adoptive moms, we are no strangers to trauma, but a lot of times we just see the impact that trauma has on our family, and we don't always fully understand the why behind it. So today's episode is going to feature Dr. Christine Culpepper. So Christine was born and raised in Louisiana, and she loves Cajun food and Mardi Gras and warm weather, of course, because she's from New Orleans. And then she went on to medical school. Then she did a pediatric residency. And then she did a fellowship in neonatology. So that's a lot of education. So now she works with NICU babies, dealing with really hard stuff that they were never meant to experience. And she and I got to talk about these different outside influences and how they can negatively impact our kids, not just as infants, but as they grow and learn to interact with others and hopefully become contributing members of society. That's the dream, right? So being a mom of a baby born addicted to multiple substances, this one really hit home for me. And it was super educational and informative. And I'm a firm believer that understanding how our kids' brains and bodies work can hand us tools to better raise them and help them heal. If you agree, then this episode is going to rock your world. So get excited. Also, just to let you guys know, Dr. Culpepper was getting over the flu when we recorded, so you might be able to tell, but she's all better now, so no worries there. Before we get to the episode, I want to tell you guys, I did a drawing last week for all of the listeners who went and rated and reviewed the podcast on iTunes. The winner is Wally Vaughn, so obviously, that's not like a real name. So if you are Wally Vaughn, then reach out to me because you have won yourself a Target gift card. If you haven't yet, please rate and review because all of those awesome ratings and reviews that I got last week really help bump up the podcast. They help tell other people, hey, you should totally go and listen to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. So thank you guys so much, and please keep it up. If you haven't done it yet, it takes like 2 seconds. I promise. A couple of ways to get involved are my Facebook group and my email list. Those links are on the adoptivemompodcast.com. They're just great ways to get connected to a community and connected to me specifically. I am better able to talk directly to you through those 2 resources. So get on it. And that's all I have for you guys. Let's jump into my interview with Christine Culpepper. All right, everyone, welcome to the podcast and welcome to Dr. Christine Culpepper. I am thrilled to be talking to you. You are actually the first medical doctor that has been on my show, and that's kind of intimidating because you're like really smart, and I don't know about a lot of this stuff, so I'm excited to chat with you. So how's it going this morning?
It is good. I am recovering from the flu, and so I am actually feeling good for the first time today, and I am super excited to be on this podcast and so honored that you chose me to come and talk to you guys.
Absolutely. And the flu is no joke. So you are like a survivor right now, and that's a big deal. And you had a sick kid, and those 2 things combined are no fun. But yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show too. And I know I said this in the intro, but we're going to be chatting about a lot of things that having to do with babies. So in the other 2 episodes for this trauma series, we've talked about really one in particular, trauma disorder. And in this one, we're going to be talking about drug exposure, fetal alcohol syndrome, physical trauma in utero, and a lot of those kinds of things. But first, before we get started on that, I want you to tell us, why are you, Dr. Culpepper, qualified to talk about this stuff?
So I am a neonatologist, which means, initially I got my training in pediatrics. So I'm a pediatrician who then went to get extra training. So I did a fellowship. As my husband says, I was in school forever and finally have a real job. So I got extra training to work specifically with babies, whether that be premature babies, term babies that are sick, babies that are exposed to drugs, babies with genetic conditions. And So that is, I mean, I work primarily with babies. I work in a hospital setting. I'm not outpatient. And yep, it's my life. It is babies and I love it.
Yeah. Well, and you have one of the best jobs because, aside from the really sad stuff that happens with your job, obviously, but like you get to hold the babies and then give them back to their parents.
It doesn't help with baby fever though.
I guess that's true. Okay. So yeah, tell us a little bit about just your family stuff though. You mentioned your husband. So what's going on at home for you?
So yes, I am married to my husband. We've been married 7 years. We actually met when I was a resident in Little Rock, and we actually both worked for UAMS, although would have never met because he's IT, and so is holed away inside a room, not at the hospital. And I was a pediatric resident at the time, which means I was holed away at the hospital all the time, not really having much of a social life. And so we actually met on Match.com. Been married for 7 years. He is my rock and an amazing father. We have 2 kids, and he helps deal with the fact that mommy's not around all the time with, since I work in the hospital, I take shifts during the day, but I also have call nights where I get called in and have to go. And so I'm not here for dinners or bedtime, and sometimes not here in the morning to bring them to school. So he has mastered hairdoing on 2 kids, which I think is impressive.
Yeah, it is.
He's actually very good at a double ponytail.
Wow.
I know. Yeah. Not even just regular hairdoing. He's got some good skills.
Yeah, that's impressive. My husband, he has no fingernails because he bites them below the quick. And so the other day I was trying to teach him how to do a ponytail and he was just pawing at her head. And I tried really hard for 5 minutes. I was just like, "You're doing great, honey." And then finally I was like, no, just let me finish.
Yes, he's working on learning braiding right now because they're both into having their hair braided. So it's some advanced moves over here.
Yeah. So, okay, so you're a girl mom. Tell me about your kids.
Yes, so I have 2 kids, Piper, who is just about to turn 5, and Madeline, who just turned 3. They are girly girls to the max. I am not the most girly, so I'm not really sure how that happened. They love princesses. They wear dresses every day. Basically, we only insist upon wearing pants because you have to keep warm under the dresses. But if not, they would totally not wear pants. They are so sweet and so goofy. Yeah. Very fun kids, but yes, very, very girly.
Oh, girl, I have one of those too. I feel you. But, okay. So you have 2 kids and both of them are not adopted, but you work with kids every day. We've already alluded to this, that are from hard places, that are dealing with things that, to be honest, no human should ever have to deal with. So you work with these kids and you see really, really sad things, in addition to, I'm sure, the joyful things as well. But what drew you to that profession? What drew you to want to work with the difficult cases?
Well, it really starts off with one. I actually thought I wanted to do OB early on. I have an aunt who's an OB. I had some experience shadowing her around. But every time I realized when I went to deliveries, I wanted to be with the baby. I didn't want to stay with the mom. The exciting part once the baby's out is the baby, right? And so that was one of the big things for me. Plus, I do think the wonderful thing about neonatology is that it has hope. I think a lot of medicine out there maybe does have hope, but this one, most babies get better. Most babies go home. Yes, they may have a really rough time in the unit, and it's horrible, and I would never wish anyone to have their baby in the unit. But they ultimately go home, and they ultimately get to lead wonderful lives. And I think one of my favorite things, especially about now living here, is that I tend to go roam around Target like all good moms, especially sometimes on a post-call. Yes, exactly. On a post-call day when I'm tired and probably shouldn't be roaming around Target because then I just kind of fill up the cart with random things. But I run into moms that stop me and are like, "Oh my gosh, Dr. Culpepper, you took care of my baby," and they show me pictures. And that is one of the most amazing things to say, "Oh, well, my baby was having seizures early on, and we figured it out, we got it treated, and now they're growing and thriving, and a little 3-year-old sitting in the cart, smiling at me. I mean, how amazing is that?
Yes. I love that. I think that because it's a lot, it's very similar to our calling as adoptive moms to see these kids through their hard times and help them to flourish. And that's what you do too. You take a broken situation and you get to walk them through to the other side often. And I think that's so neat. I have chills right now because that just seems like a really, really cool, just job that you get to do. And I'm sure that it's very delayed gratification probably because you're just seeing the day-to-day stuff. And, when you don't get to see the results until they stop you in Target, you're
right.
It's just really neat.
Or Facebook. Luckily, there's, with the modern age, I do get to see people post pictures on Facebook or Target. And we actually do every year have a reunion for people that are welcome to come back and come show off their kids, show us how amazing they're doing. And oh my gosh, it's such a fun day. And I love going around and seeing all of them and talking to their parents. And most of the time I recognize the parents. You don't really recognize the kid because they've changed so much.
Yeah.
But it's one of my favorite days, being a neonatologist.
I love that. So, but let's talk about some of those harder things. So, I'm sure that you are very familiar with having to deal with social services and stuff and calling in extra people to deal with some of these harder cases. Walk us through that process. So when a baby is born, say you don't know that it's going to be born addicted to drugs or anything like that, what are some of the signs that you guys see before you have to, make those hard calls?
So a lot of times we have some clue. I would say it's probably rare that we don't. A lot of moms are honest and do tell us that they've done drugs. They may not tell us the extent of what they've done or exactly all the different drugs they've done. But I would say most of the time we do have some clue. But whether those babies are going to withdraw or what exactly is going to unfold, can be very unexpected. And what we're looking for is lots of different signs. The two most typical, depending on what they're withdrawing from, are neurologic signs. So these babies sometimes they start off kind of more on the sleepier end and then actually kind of change. And then they're not sleeping as well. They can be very jittery. They have higher tone. So their muscles are very tight. So instead of kind of laying more loose in the bed, they're laying much more tight, arms really up, legs taut up. They can sneeze a lot. They can have a lot of frantic sucking where they just constantly want to be sucking on something, whether that be a pacifier or a bottle. They can have loose stools, which is a very hard thing in babies because, as you know, babies eat liquid, so they poop liquid. But it can be even more watery than what you would normally expect with a baby. You can tell that it's hard to describe. It's like colic where you feel like their tummies hurt. They can get horrible diaper rash from the loose stools. So it can be a really big constellation of symptoms that we're looking for. And the problem is that you've got withdrawal. So babies can withdraw from things, but you can also get babies that are born with, they were exposed in utero, that they actually are going to have toxicity from these drugs. And so parsing out, is this a toxicity or is this a withdrawal, is a very challenging thing.
Yeah, that sounds really complicated, and it sounds like you're having to look at a really fragile thing for signs of really sad things. So what about like fetal alcohol syndrome? What are some of the things you see there? So I would say,
so that is probably one of the harder diagnoses to make because it's very, very subtle. These babies actually, from what the studies see, they don't really withdraw from the alcohol. So that's not something you're seeing withdrawal from. It's more physical characteristics in the babies. And a lot of times I will say it's probably honestly missed because it's so subtle that a lot of times I would say it probably gets more picked up later on as these babies develop and they're missing milestones, their language isn't as good, and that's more when fetal alcohol is picked up. It's also not something you can really test for easily. And so that's a very hard diagnosis. And I can't even say I've ever made that diagnosis personally in a baby.
That'd be hard. It'd be hard to discover later on and try to backtrack and figure out like what were the signs that we, where did we see, or what did we miss, or just whatever. Okay. And then what about like physical trauma? So say like the mom had been abused while she was pregnant. What are some of the things you see there?
So that may more be things that were the mom didn't get good prenatal care. So, let's say she was abused, and so she doesn't want to go into the doctor, and, you're stripped down. Maybe there's bruises evident, something that would point to the fact that she's been abused. The mom might not have good nutrition at that point. So I would say that's probably more you may have a smaller baby, but you may not be able to pick up anything in the baby.
Man. And that's, to be honest, these things are hard to discuss because you never want to wish that. But, as a drug baby mom, that was one of our adopted kids, is that he was addicted to just a plethora of things when he was born. And that was something that I walked into completely blind. I had no experience with this. There's no handbook on dealing with a drug addicted baby. And especially because a lot of the drugs can present differently. So talk to us about that. What are some of the things that you see differences between, say, like meth and even just as much as like smoking cigarettes? What are some of the different ways that transfers into a baby? Right.
And so, that's the hard thing, kind of like I said earlier, is that they can all present in very similar ways. Things like methamphetamines and nicotine, cigarettes, can present with more of a toxicity. So very similar symptoms or signs that you see in a withdrawal baby, but these tend to get better with time because as the drug gets out of the system, the baby's going to do better. Versus opioids, when you withdraw from something, as the drug gets out of your system, you tend to do worse. And so you tend to actually, with opioids, you tend to get worse over time versus with cigarettes, methamphetamines, you're going to tend to get better over time. And there are, it tends to be a compilation that, it's rare that a mom uses one drug or, nicotine, for example. I think a lot of people don't think like, oh yeah, they know smoking is bad when you're pregnant, but I don't think realize all the effects it can have on the baby. The baby can actually be growth restricted, so not grow well in utero. The baby can have toxicity once it's born, and they're actually showing some that the baby can have lifelong problems from it. And so it's a huge thing. But then you mix that with other drugs and you can just it's a very, very mixed picture. And it's very hard because really, we have treatment for withdrawal, but it's only withdrawal from opioids. Other than that, we don't have a true medical treatment, I should say, a drug that we can give these babies. There's nothing we can technically do for the baby that is showing us toxic signs, but then trying to parse out which one is showing us opioid withdrawal versus a toxicity is very hard. And a lot of times they were then relying on the mom's history, telling us what she took. And like I said, most of these moms are pretty honest, especially if their baby is having problems. They want to tell you what they took. That way we can figure out a way to help these babies. Yeah. We also have testing we can do. We can urine drug test. We can do meconium drug testing, and we can actually do umbilical cord testing where we send a piece of the umbilical cord off for testing. The problem is the meconium drug testing, which is new baby poop, that really black tarry first poops. And the cord, it can take 48 hours, 72-hour time to get these results back. And, in that window, you sometimes have to make some big decisions.
Yeah. Oh, I imagine. All right, guys, I hope you're really enjoying my interview with Dr. Culpepper. She's awesome, and I hope you guys are learning as much as I did. I'm really excited to announce something really cool. So I am going to be partnering for another giveaway with a company called Restoration Threads. They have the coolest mission. Are you ready? They want to raise awareness and provide support for various foster care organizations. And every month, Restoration Threads is going to choose a different foster care organization to financially support through their merchandise sales. So how cool is that? And I'm going to be partnering with them to do a giveaway drawing next week for one free shirt on their website. And you guys can check out all those designs on the adoptivemompodcast.com/restoration threads. My favorite one says every number has a name. These are real kids with real faces and that they matter. So to enter the giveaway, you're going to need to go and follow me and Restoration Threads on Instagram. I'll have the link to both of those in the show notes, but you can just go to Instagram and search The Adoptive Mom and Restoration Threads. To let us know that you want to enter the giveaway, drop an emoji comment on one of our photos about the drawing. So I'm going to post one, she's going to post one, just drop a little emoji. That will let us know that you're entered, and then we'll do the drawing next Sunday. And I totally check to make sure you're following both me and whoever I'm doing the drawing with. So definitely check all those boxes because I'm not going to put you in the drawing if you didn't do it. Just saying. I hope you guys have fun with it, and just check out their shop anyway because they are awesome. Okay, back to Christine Culpepper. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I have heard that since methamphetamine, in the grand scheme of things, it's a newer drug, or on the newer end of the spectrum. So the testing or the it's just really hard to see the effects. And that was one of the drugs that my baby was born with. And we were just told that we just don't know a lot. You know, we've heard that sometimes it can lead to ADHD or something like that, but we just don't know. So what are some of the ways that we can follow these kids and figure out what effects these drugs have long term?
So I think that lays into a lot of our problems in neonatology. So even just looking at things other than drugs, you know, just like, oh, what does this medical treatment do for this baby long term? Follow up with babies is very hard. So you have to, one, get parents who are going to comply, who are going to, you know, if they move, give you your new address, give you the new phone number. And so keeping up with these kids is just one ball, you know, just one thing you have to do. Then you're going to throw into the environment these kids are raised in. And so let's say a kid goes to a home where it gets abused versus a kid that goes to a home where it's brought to the pediatrician regularly versus a kid that, you know, grows up in a home where, let's say, maybe it goes to the doctor some, but it doesn't, you know, has other let's say it has other medical problems. So there's so many, I guess, confounding factors that this research is so hard to do. And so it really is a lot of times that we don't have great answers. And it's probably best for the parents to know that, one, we don't, but, you know, we do presume that there may be some problems, and that making sure that you do have good follow-up with your pediatrician, and that if you have concerns, they really need to be voiced, because, you know, pediatricians have little spots, you know, where they have to fit in and see your, let's say, a well child visit, fit you in. How is your kid growing? How's your kid eating? How is your kid walking, talking? All these things they have to fit into this time slot and try to pick up on problems. And so I feel like it really is up to the parents to help say, hey, you know, telling these pediatricians when you go, let's say you change pediatricians, my baby was exposed to X, Y, or Z, or we don't even know fully what my baby was exposed to as part of your medical history. So we can't ever forget that. And then if you have concerns, let's say speech doesn't seem right, or we seem to have some ADHD symptoms, really, you know, getting in there and getting on top of it early, because I do believe that early intervention is really key.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think that, I mean, I didn't even think about that so much of that can depend on their home life as well, not even just past, past infancy or past when they're in the NICU. And a lot of that can depend on your decisions that you had to make, like you said, in that first 48 hours of whether or not we call DHS, whether or not we send this baby home. And with things like you're saying fetal alcohol syndrome, you might not even see the signs, or you might not see the extent of them later on. And I want to talk about more about fetal alcohol syndrome as we progress down the line, because I'm trying to think of this as like a timeline. So, you know, you think about, we've talked about birth, we talked about right after birth. So when they're in your unit and say a baby is withdrawing, I know this is a really not fun question to answer, but what do you see that in that baby? What are they going through? I mean, in their body, and then what do you see with your eyeballs as the doctor?
Mm-hmm. So one, I rely a ton on my nurses to let me know, because as you know, we come through, we're there for a little bit of time. And so I rely a lot on them telling me, how is this baby sleeping? How is it responding to its environment? With a baby that is at risk for opioid withdrawal, we actually have a whole scoring system to help us know how bad is this baby withdrawing and do we need medication. And so things you can see, kind of like I talked about earlier, would be that the baby is very jittery. So the baby is kind of shaky, especially once unwrapped. So sometimes they're calm when they're nice and swaddled, but you unwrap them from their swaddle and they can be very jittery. Their tone is very high. Think about babies, newborn babies. They have, their head's real heavy. They lag that back. Some of these babies with higher tone that are withdrawing, their head stays really tight in, and they don't tend to lag it back if you pick them up. They can have horrible diaper rash. They can sneeze a lot, very frantic sucking. Let's say you go into the room and that baby startle reflex where their arms kind of fly out. A little noise can make those babies have a very exaggerated Moro reflex, we call it. And so a lot of it is putting together what I see on exam, but I'm catching a glimpse in time, plus what the nurses are telling me, plus what the parents are telling me.
Yes. And are they at higher risk for reflux as well?
They're at higher risk, I would say, for tummy issues in general. I'm not sure if necessarily reflux, but they tend to be more sensitive. They tend, like I said, they have diarrhea, they have tummy upset. A lot of these babies, if moms aren't going to breastfeed, or let's say it's an adoptive situation and we don't have breast milk, then I do recommend starting these babies on a more gentle, hydrolyzed, broken down formula from the start.
Absolutely. And that's something we saw as well. And it was hard because, we adopted through the foster care system. So we got WIC, and WIC doesn't have those options.
Yes.
And so we were faced with do we buy this very expensive formula with our own money, or do we continue with, just Similac basic formula? And it's a hard decision. To be honest, I had my daughter 5 months after he was born. And so I did give him some of my breast milk throughout the rest of his first year, which I think helps some. But it's so hard as a mom to make those decisions, especially like me, when you have no clue what's going on. I was told he's withdrawing from meth, marijuana, cigarettes, and opiates, but that sounded somewhat like a foreign language to me. And I didn't know what medication he had been on or what we were dealing with. And one of the things that I saw really quickly was that if you put him down, it was like you were torturing him.
Yes.
But I think that goes to another question I had, which is neurologically, what is going on in their bodies? What are they feeling, as much as you can know?
Yeah. So, I think I think if you asked anybody who ever took drugs consistently and asked how they felt when they were withdrawing, then they could probably explain that the best, because they are, I don't know if I could even describe it because I've never felt it myself, but if the moms do stay involved in, let's say it's not an adoptive situation, I think whenever I'm trying to explain to these moms what the babies are going through, I ask them, have you ever stopped your meds abruptly or not been able to get them and felt withdrawal? And then I say, this is what your baby is feeling. And that really hits home for them. And I think a lot of people then understand what their baby is going through and the need for medication. Because I think, the problem is once we start a medication, so let's say a baby is withdrawing enough from opioids, it tends to be a prolonged NICU course. So you're in the unit for, I would say, minimum 2 weeks, and sometimes longer, sometimes up to a month or more, getting started on meds and then being slowly weaned off. And so it's not a decision we make lightly. And so I would, for these babies, I'm sure it's miserable to feel that way. And ultimately, what we start with is what we call non-pharmacological measures. And so these are the babies that if we know early on, we're recommending we don't need bright lights in the room. We don't need tons of people visiting. This is not the baby you need everybody coming to visit and pass around and, loud noises. You need it nice and quiet, maybe some white noise. You need dim lights. These babies require a lot of holding. They most of the time are not babies you can lay down. I've even heard a talk where they say that a lot of these babies sleep better on their sides, and you almost have to train them to sleep better on their back for safe sleep. They need to be held almost 24/7. These are babies that our nurses are walking around if the mom has to leave the room, this is ones where our nurses are walking around the unit holding these babies because they just can't be put down. And so it's a lot more, there is a lot you have to pay attention to and a lot that needs to be done. And newborn babies are a lot to start off with.
Absolutely. Well, and prior to this, I was a fairly just neurotypical mom. I had a normal baby and we'd adopted a teenager, but I knew what I knew, which was, you've got to, teach the baby that sometimes it's okay that mommy has to go to the bathroom or whatever. So you can, you're not going to die if you sit by yourself for a second. And when we got my son Rock, that was not the case. I mean, he could not be put down. He was constantly screaming, constantly just agitated. And I had no idea. All I knew was I've got to teach him that it's okay to not have to be held all the time. And now looking back, I wish that that's not what I had done. So talking to moms like me who are getting kids or who could potentially in the future get kids like this, what would you encourage them? What behaviors would you encourage them to throw out the window as far as this is not a normal baby. You can't be a normal mom.
This is not going to be the baby that's going to go lay down in their crib and sleep for 3 hours at a time and then wake up and eat and go right back to bed. These are babies, or, like I said, where you're going to be passing them around at a function. These babies also, once they leave the unit, especially, let's say, even if they got treated, they're still going to go home and have symptoms. They're still going to be probably more colicky babies. So this is not once you leave the unit, let's say we watch you for withdrawal and we say, okay, you don't meet criteria for meds, or you were more toxicity and so you don't need medication. Once you go home, just like you said, you're not going home with a baby that is perfectly fixed. You have a baby who can still have problems. And so these babies, you just need to hold all the time. That being said, you also need to know when to walk away. And just like any baby, you need to know that, yes, ultimately you have to pee and you have to shower and you need to eat. And sometimes you may just need a mom brain break. And if the baby does have to cry, as long as it's in a safe place, that's what you do. Or you recruit help and say, hey, grandparents, friends, especially for the first, few weeks of life, I may need a little more help and I may need some backup for holding this baby around the clock. A good baby carrier is amazing. And then a talk that I listened to recently talked about slowly introducing stimuli to the baby. So figuring out what your baby does well with, what your baby accepts. Let's say your baby really loves to be swaddled super tight, and that helps the withdrawal symptoms. And a lot of times those babies really love really good swaddling. Let's say but your baby's nice and awake and it's okay. We're not having those moments where we're screaming and we look really nice and alert. Try loosening that swaddle a little bit. So try slowly introducing some stimuli to your baby. That way he or she does start getting used to these things and doesn't constantly have to be swaddled all the time. But I think help is a huge thing. I also was going to send you 2 videos on one. These are things we do in the unit, which I think are amazing and really recommend. I wish I would have done them with my own children, and my children weren't withdrawing, but one is infant massage. And so seeing if your baby would accept, touch with a massage oil or a coconut oil is really good because it's really gentle on baby skin. So anything unscented, I would say. Also, there's something called a swaddle bath, which I think is actually great for all babies because, you take these newborn babies, they're used to being, water's still a good thing for them. They like nice warm water, but you take them, they're used to being all curled up in utero, nice and squished, and then you kind of flail them out in the bathtub. And a lot of them just don't like it. And so our therapist in the unit do something called a swaddle bath, where you actually have them swaddled in a blanket while you bathe them, and you slowly, and that blanket is wet, warm water, and you kind of slowly unwrap and wash one extremity at a time and then swaddle them back. And oh my goodness, it's like a spa bath. Like seriously, sometimes I'm like, who wants to swaddle bathe me? Like this looks amazing.
Exactly.
Or give me a massage. But these are, I think, maybe some tricks that you could do at home, other than buying a really awesome baby carrier to just keep that baby skin to skin, and you can have hands free and still move.
Yeah. It's really fun wearing a Mobi while you're pregnant. Got really good at it.
That is amazing.
It does create a good like shelf for them to sit on.
Yeah, they could sit right there. Not bad. That's awesome.
Had to get really for a non-touchy-feely person, that was a rough season for me.
I'm sure. Oh my goodness.
Okay, so before we move on to some of these, some of the things you see as a child gets older and grows, and some of the milestone issues that you have, I want to ask you about an issue that I did not prep you for, so my apologies. But I know this is something that you might not actually see a ton of, but just because you're a doctor and you're really smart, you might know some stuff about. What about failure to thrive? So as a result of neglect, what do we see there in babies?
So most of the time with failure to thrive, with neglect, you've got really tiny babies. So these are babies that were most likely born okay. They don't always have to be, but a lot of times they're born, they've got you ask their birth weight, it was a good 7-8 pound baby. And then you see these babies falling off their growth curves. A lot of times the difference, if it's a neglect, is that when you feed these babies, they eat. They are hungry, they ravenously eat, versus, let's say, a failure to thrive from an innate GI issue or something like that, where maybe you feed these babies and they're not going to eat because they now have an oral aversion because they have so many GI symptoms from eating, and so they don't want to eat because it hurts.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times these babies are, if they come back in, they are very tiny at this point. But like I said, normally very hungry and then put on weight quickly. That's an easy thing to see. So you feed a baby, you weigh it every single day, and they start gaining weight very quickly. That may clue into your mind that maybe this baby wasn't fed appropriately at home.
Yeah. And that's got to be really hard to see as well, especially when you're having to, again, make these decisions, as a mandated reporter, you're like, do I send this baby home?
Right. I would say most of the time we report.
Yeah.
If we have a question, we get social work involved. Social work talks to DHS, and then it's in DHS's hands at that point. And whether that be they follow the mom, they follow the family, they do home visits, to whether they take the baby away, that we can only show them what we see. But I would say we always err on the side of more reporting, especially if we feel like we have it. This is not something we ever do lightly. We don't ever just go report because we're like, oh, we think maybe, if we truthfully have a concern, and there's a lot of times other things that point out to, with the families, either their behavior in the hospital, other things that show us some red flags. Then, we have a big team. We've got nurses who can observe. We have us, we have social workers. And then if we do truthfully have a concern, then we report to DHS.
Yeah. Well, and that's good. That's what, it's got to just be, I don't know, it's got to be a hard balance doing your job. And, but let's move on to some of the stuff that maybe they're out of your unit, but what are some of the things that you see with these different trauma disorders, that they've been affected by early on? What are some of the things that you see in fetal alcohol syndrome as they grow?
So fetal alcohol syndrome is one of the ones that we know that they have problems as they grow. Mm-hmm. These kids tend to start off small and they can have growth problems. Most of them they can have behavior problems, and a lot of them have learning problems, which is a big thing for fetal alcohol syndrome. And it's one of the ones that we really do have good follow-up data to say these kids do have these problems, and that you are going to need to watch them closely for learning disability and problems, especially once they get into school.
Yeah. Well, and I know that the behavior problems can be really tricky for especially adoptive parents who didn't necessarily do the damage, so to speak, but now they're trying to figure out something that they have no context for, and they're just seeing a child misbehave, to be frank,
right,
constantly. So what are some of the things that those parents can, I mean, tell themselves to give themselves some grace, but then also take appropriate steps to walk their child through that?
So I think, one of the big things is you don't know what happened to this kid. And then depending, this baby, maybe you got it right after birth, and maybe you do know that there's drugs. So then you can say, okay, we do have this history, and this it probably is playing into it. Or let's say you got this baby at a few months or at a year, and who knows what happened during that time period. And that I think for you guys, I mean, it's such an amazing, wonderful thing that you adopt these babies and you give them this hope, and so you are their lifeline. You are the person to say, hey, there's a problem. I either know you were exposed to something, or I know that maybe something could have happened, and let's figure out getting you help and, getting even parents help. I mean, you may need, let's say you have a kid who has a lot of behavior problems, parenting is hard. Oh my goodness. It's so hard.
Yes.
And so making sure that you're taking care of yourself too, as a parent, making sure that you're getting the appropriate mommy time, or let's say these behavior issues are really wearing on you, maybe having someone to talk to outside of the family about how this is all going. Someone to help you out through this process, I think is a great thing. So I just always reaching out for help. And never being ashamed to say, I need help as a parent. I don't think that you should, it takes a village, truthfully, to raise kids. And I think we should use our village.
Absolutely. And so, okay, so then talking about some of the different, we touched on this earlier, some of the different things that you see within the NICU for different kinds of babies, but what about as they grow with drugs? So I know that we've already discussed there's very little data for what a meth, what kind of a kid a meth baby is going to turn into. And it's really hard because even I have one and I'm like, I don't know which behaviors are from that and which are from opiates and whatever else. So what are some of the different behaviors you see in adolescence from the different drugs?
So methamphetamines are really just isn't data. That's just one thing. One, it tends to be more sporadic use, and so it's not a consistently used drug most of the time during pregnancy, and it tends to get mixed in with all the other drugs, and so that's a really hard one. Cocaine, they've shown some long-term effects. Alcohol, like we talked about, fetal alcohol syndrome is definitely one that you can see. Intellectual disability, behavior problems. Nicotine actually is one that there's some evidence that you can have behavior problems. There's also, I think, concern so if, let's say these moms were addicted to medications, then is this addictive personality, this addictive trait going to run in the family? So I think you are at higher risk for these kids to be more experimental with drugs, to, I think it probably depends on the environment that they were raised in, but even with that being said, a lot of alcoholics, it tends to run in the family. And so these addictive personalities may be something that is innately in this kid. And so you may need to watch out for this kid going out and trying some things and getting into the wrong crowd. And I think keeping a very open conversation with your kid, talking about, letting this kid know what he or she was exposed to.
Yeah.
And knowing that they maybe are at higher risk. It maybe would make them change their mind about certain things. I think, it's so hard. I wish there was better, like these are things I would definitely watch out for. Or these are things you're definitely going to see. But I think all of it's going to depend so much on how this kid was ultimately raised. So many other social factors are really going to play into it. But at the same point, if this kid goes out and starts experimenting with drugs, this may be something, it may not be anything, you did wrong as a parent. Because I think parents are always beating themselves up for what their kids do. This may be something that the kid has an addiction problem, and that's from genetics.
Yeah.
And something you may not be able to change, but something that you need to keep on high alert for.
So that reminds me, I mean, it brings a question to mind, and this is probably a really dumb question. I'm going to preface it with that. But does, say a kid was born addicted to, to whatever drugs, and they try them later, does their body remember that? Does it jump quicker into addiction than, say, someone who just tried it and then decided it wasn't for them?
I honestly don't know, but I think they probably are at higher risk for trying things and getting easier addicted to things.
Yeah.
Maybe earlier experimentation. So I think that's a very high possibility, although I'm not sure if that's truthfully found in the literature.
Yeah.
Or haven't looked at that in the literature.
But I think that that's a good reason for what you were saying, which I love that you said it's good to have open conversations with these kids, because if they know that, hey, your body is predisposed to struggle with this, so let's just not go there, or, whatever, and have those open conversations, I think that could really help.
Right.
So what about things like, you mentioned earlier muscle rigidity? Is that something that goes away over time, or are those the kids that are in PT that are struggling to have normal flexibility?
That tends to go away with over time,
okay,
depending whether that was a toxicity, and so it goes out of the system a little faster, versus whether it was withdrawal, and so you just truthfully have to get over that hump of withdrawing. I would say some kids we do recommend follow up with PT, ultimately just until you really can relax, to help with their increased tone. But it does something that it does tend to go away with time.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, you mentioned earlier, I don't remember what you called it. I think it started with an M, but the reflex where they are really
jumpy. The Moro. Yes.
Moro. Thank you. So, I mean, we have experience with this, and I know that it leads to behavior problems and impulse control issues. And I think that those are the things that a lot of parents struggle with the most as their kid grows older, because we just want them to be, quote, normal. But they have these things in their bodies that prevent that. So, these are the kids that you see in OT a lot, and that are struggling with, you can't just knock something over because you think it might be fun, or you can't just hit someone because you think it might be fun. So what are some of the things you see there with that reflex transitioning into impulse control?
So I don't know if it necessarily has anything to do with the Moro reflex, but maybe the underlying, so that's actually, so it's a reflex that tends to go away with time in babies, but, and it's a startle from a loud noise, but, there are neuro changes that go on, so these babies, when they're exposed to drugs, their little brains are developing. And so there are changes that are done that I'm sure there have been mice studies that show you exactly what some of these changes are. And there are some things we probably don't know about. But these, going into your question of the kids being a little more impulsive, or let's say maybe they have sensitivity issues, it's like it's getting them the help. It's getting them into OT early. It's, being very persistent as a parent about, hey, my kid was exposed to these things and I'm noticing these subtle things, or these things are really bothering me. And you can always ask, hey, can I get evaluated? Can I get my kid to PT, OT, speech? I am a firm believer in early intervention. Actually, my youngest needed physical therapy for some core strength problems, and I was blown away with what a few months of physical therapy did for her. Like it is truthfully amazing what getting them into early intervention can do. And I'm not saying that's going to perfectly cure everything, but getting them into those therapies, and then also in meeting with teachers ahead of time and saying, hey, these are the problems that we have, with my child. It's really knowing your child, what sets them off, and how to work around these things, or how to work on these things, and making sure that everybody understands, that everybody's on board, and just making sure you have a plan in place the best you can.
Yes. And I'm a big fan of giving people the correct eyes for your kids. So I love that you're saying these things as well, because I think that, a lot of the times we see parents that are adoptive parents that are just almost like willing their kids to be normal, again, in quotes. And so they turn a blind eye to some of these issues because they just want to chalk it up to age, or, just whatever. And I think that doesn't serve your child well. That doesn't help them
Right.
to have that life that you want for them. Because I want that desperately for my kid. And I think that, he's in therapy 5 times a week and that's helping him. And every time re-eval comes around, I get a little nervous that he's going to test out because I'm like, no, he needs to be in therapy.
It really is. It's amazing what therapy can do very early on and getting them in and getting them the right things. And then truthful for parents too, making sure that you're getting all the help you need. I mean, there's early intervention programs. There's programs that can help you pay for these things, programs that can help you get the daycare that you need. Or, I mean, I was a little blown away with how much, a session of physical therapy costs.
Yeah.
But knowing that you can get your kid cared for, we actually had Madeline in early intervention and we had people come out to the house and talk to us. And, not only did we have her evaluated for PT, we had her evaluated for OT because the therapist noticed a few little things and she scored out of OT, but it was wonderful that it was, one thing kind of led to the other and everybody gave us wonderful pointers on things to do to help her strengthen and to, be able to do the little things that she wanted to do. She had a lot of problems with doing the stairs and, when you go up and down stairs all the time, that's a huge thing. And so they actually would come to our house and work on the stairs with her. I mean, it's amazing what they will do for your kids. And I think the confidence that it helps your kids build when they can do some things and they can, they have the support and they start figuring things out. So I think also as a parent, just being persistent. And I'm good friends with my pediatrician, but I basically called him and told him I needed a therapy. But it never hurts to ask. It never hurts to push a little bit either. Like I said, we as doctors have limited windows to fit your kids in. And so we can't assess everything. And, if you have to, before those appointments, write down a list of things that you want to discuss that we don't get in there and forget. And if you need, you could sometimes ask for more time scheduling the appointment. I think you need to be advocate for your kid.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like, you've given us so much information, and I think that sometimes we want an immediate fix, and that's not always the starting point or what's best. And sometimes, to be cliche, knowledge is power. And so learning all of these things that you've taught us today is so important in helping us understand our kids and what they're going through and what their little bodies have survived, to be honest, and giving them credit for that and allowing them to have their journey as they walk through something that no one should ever have to go through. So thank you for that. And I want to ask you just one final question. What would you tell people who are not struggling with these things in their home? What would you tell them to give them better eyes for people who are?
I think one of the biggest things is just understanding that kids are kids and they can act out for different reasons. And just because that kid in the mall that's throwing a fit on the ground doesn't mean that parent isn't a good parent or that parent wasn't being observant or did something wrong. You don't know what that kid has been through. You don't know what that parent has been through. I think that even goes back to these NAS babies, because I feel like a lot of judgments gets put on these birth moms too. And a lot of these moms, when you truthfully sit down and hear their story and hear what they've gone through in their life, it's horrible. It's horrible. And you almost understand why they did some of the things that they did. And so just really, never judging a parent and knowing that you don't know why this kid is misbehaving. And that, if you can offer help in any way, that's wonderful. And I think specifically for like the withdrawal babies and the ones that go home, that knowing that these families are going to have a fussier kid and maybe just bringing them a meal or coming to say, hey, I'm going to come hold your kid while you shower, because you may not, like you said, be able to put this baby down for a very long period of time. They may not even be able to sleep at night in their own crib for a while. I know a lot of these ones, sleep on their moms or sleep on the nurses in the unit, like I said. And so they're a lot of extra care. And so just being willing to help out in any way, is always wonderful. And like I said, just really avoiding judgment, because you never know what happened to these babies, what happened to these moms, you've never walked in their shoes.
Girl, that's like some good stuff right there. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm so excited that you got to sit down and talk with us and, I don't know, just educate us on some really important issues. So thank you again, Dr. Christine Culpepper. And I'll have those 2 videos that she mentioned in the show notes. And where can we, if we wanted to follow up or if we wanted to have questions, where could we direct those questions for you?
If you want, you could give people my email address.
Sure. Or where could we find you on social media or anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm on Facebook as Christine Culpepper. You can find me there. I tend to scope it a decent amount because I'm part of a lot of moms groups, sadly to admit, but I like it. And I will say those 2 videos, there's one that's the massage, and then there's the other one about the swaddle bath. It is the bathtubs video, like the people who make the certain swaddle bath. You don't necessarily need that bathtub. I'm not supporting that bathtub, but in the video, it shows you the good swaddle bath. Okay. But yes, reach out to me. Email and Facebook are probably the 2 best ways, or Target. Find me roaming around the Fayetteville Target.
That sounds good. Yeah, we can just scope the, the video surveillance or whatever and be like, she's there, go.
Exactly. I might have a cup of coffee. I'll be strolling around.
Bring her a cake pop and ask her your questions, right?
Exactly. I love it.
All right, girl. Well, thank you so much. Have a good day.
Yes, thanks. You're welcome. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much for listening to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. I hope you found encouragement here. I need you to know that you are enough and you're doing a great job. We are all in this together, and I am over here cheering you on. Don't forget to check out show notes for this episode and other resources at theadoptivemompodcast.com. Thanks for joining us.